Okay, chokehold number 5, Jack Ruby. Remember, the Warren Commission just said, you know, he's just another trouble soul and another, you know, we had 3 lone nut murders in that weekend, right? The Kennedy, Tippett, it's all lone nut, and Jack Ruby's another lone troubled person who wanted to spare Jackie, you know, Kennedy, the pain of a trial. So he took out Oswald, the most important witness living, okay? And again, the HSCA comes in and he says, Ruby, not at all the guy the Warren Commission says. Okay, so we'll get into it. Okay? The HSCA was inclined to believe that Jack Ruby did go to Cuba to get Santos Traficante out of jail, and that he probably met him. They didn't say definitely, but words to the effect that most likely occurred. Who's Santos Traficante? Well, he had casinos on the island. He was one of the 4 or 5 top mobsters of his day. He was responsible for all the heroin that would go through Cuba into the US. And he's one of the persons of interest. He was one of the people that the CIA made a deal with to eliminate Castro. You had Traficante, Giancana were the 2 main ones, and Johnny Rosselli, right? And, you know, he had strippers and bars, and this is what they said, is usually when you got into that business in Dallas, you had to deal with New Orleans, where Carlos Marcello was. So the HSCA found huge links between Ruby, Marcello, and Traficante. And it's not Paul Bleau saying it, it's the HSCA, right? The top dog spoke. Blakey, okay, and Schweiker. They both spoke. Schweiker said, we know now that Ruby was an informant for the FBI, and that they met at least 10 times. Where did we ever hear that from the Warren Commission? He says that. Okay, and Blakey came out, you know, with, he says, I believe that Ruby was able to get in to kill Oswald through the corrupt cooperation of the Dallas Police Department. Who is Blakey? We don't like Blakey, many of us, because, you know, he was sort of soft on the conspiracy for a while, and then he would say, well, it's a mafia-based conspiracy. But nevertheless, what he said back then says he got help to kill Oswald. Where do we find that in the history books, right? So you have to conclude. Now they analyze his phone calls. This is an HSCA analysis of his phone calls. And he has something called suspicious calls. Those are the long-distance calls he made to mafiosi before the assassination. Hired hitmen, people linked to Giancana. And they said, oh, well, you know, he's having labor problems. Okay? But when they came out and they looked at that, it just didn't make any sense. And they spiked. Okay, they started spiking, and he went into a frenzy. And even some of the people he met, okay, beforehand, they said, what the hell is he meeting this guy for? So in the book, you're going to find all those relationships. You're going to see who he had relationships with, and you're going to say, well, he's just not a simple bar owner. Okay, he is mafia connected. He's not a made man. He's not a top dog. But he's definitely someone who wants to be in with the mafia. Okay? And this is a matter of record. If you read the HSCA, you will I'll let you read this, okay? Ruby's shooting of Oswald was not a spontaneous act, in that it involved at least some premeditation. The committee believed it was less likely that Oswald entered the police basement without assistance. The HSCA says he was helped to get into place to kill Oswald. Or they believe that. This is one that is a little bit more complex. Okay, it's the prior plots. And I have to tell you how that started. Jim Diogino was on Black Hawk Radio, and we were talking about prior plots. We talked about Chicago, and then we talked about the plot in Tampa, and then we talked about a plot in LA. The plot in Tampa involved Policarpo Lopez. The plot in LA involved Von Marlowe, and indirectly Richard Case Nagel. He was in the know about. You know what the four, Lopez, Nagel, Von Marlowe, and Oswald have in common? They're all linked to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a dead organization. I said, I have to research this organization. I have to research the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And what happened is, after the missile crisis a year early went in it down. They had 25 meetings a year in 1962 and 1963. And the Socialist Workers' Party, which sponsored the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, in the middle of the summer said, let's keep it alive on paper only. So Oswald opening a chapter in New Orleans, which is the worst city imaginable for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, because of their hatred of Castro. They were so involved in North-South trade, it didn't make any sense. It would be like opening a Fair Play for Al-Qaeda after 9/11 in New York. That's how bad that was. Okay? So he does it when there are fewer than 1,500 members. And you know what? Many of them were informants. In a room like this, if we had a Fair Play for Cuba Committee meeting in 1963, 5 or 6 of us would be informants. Okay? Probably more. So the research we found on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is incredible. Okay, so what we did after a while, okay, so even the HSCA, they look at this guy, Policarpo Lopez, and they said, how could the Warren Commission not even look into this guy when the FBI knew that there was a plot in Tampa where the guy suspected was part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and he escaped through Mexico City as a lone passenger on a plane to Cuba? How could you not look into that? They didn't want the trace of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Now, by the way, what this is called in police work is similar case analysis. So if there was a murder, say in the city, student, unfortunately gets murdered, what would the police first do? They'd ask themselves a question, well, was there anything similar that happened recently here, or, they try and look at similar cases. They never did that for the Kennedy assassination. They never looked at similar cases. They should have. Okay? This is a chart we did. It's a complicated chart. But we looked at Lee Harvey Oswalt. There was an incident in October '62 involving 2 riflemen in Springfield, Illinois. They were seen, one of them, with a rifle outside a window. Nobody knows who they were, but the point is, oh boy, we better not let open windows occur when there's a JFK motorcade, right? So this information was never passed along to the future agents or the agents in Dallas. It's kept hidden. How come there's no file? Were they Cubans? Were they, what's the case? We don't know. Nashville. Someone approached Kennedy with a sack, and he had a gun number. Okay? They arrested the guy and let him go. Okay? We don't know who that guy is. Then you have Thomas Arthur Valley, right? Interesting with him is he worked on a U-2 spy plane base. He's an ex-Marine. He had mental problems. He trained Cuban exiles, for a possible attack on Cuba. Then, 2 months before the assassination, or a number of months before, a motorcade in Chicago, he gets moved from Long Island to Chicago and gets a job in a 5-floor building overlooking a motorcade with the perfect Dealey Plaza type of view. That's what he gets. Okay? Then this guy's interesting, Santiago. I'm not going to go in through them, but Santiago Garriga did something as crazy as Oswalt. He opened a Fair Play for Cuba Committee chapter in Miami with the help of Anita Potocny. Who's Anita Potocny? She's a CIA assistant to William Harvey. She helped them open that chapter. There are traces, and Bill Simpich covers that. We may want to ask him a few questions about that. I talked to you about Policarpo Lopez, Harry Power, Richard K. Snigel. This guy, Robert B.D. Fennell. This is December 21, 1963. He's making threats against LBJ. Oswald's Kennedy's dead, so let's go and hit LBJ. And he makes threats, he gets arrested. He's part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Then you have in 1965, the Liberty Lobby bombers. They were going to blow up monuments in the US and they were part of terrorist groups. One of them is part of the was part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. So what we're saying here is one of the things you would do with, according to ZR Rifle or Operation Northwoods, is let's not only get rid of our problem, let's figure out how to blame the foe. And how will we blame him? We'll connect him to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which was Castro's network in the USA. And we'll have him meet agents, and there's going to be all sorts of stories about Oswald receiving bribes and things of that nature. This is what this chart does. So if you go through this chart, you have a lot of the prior or similar cases, and then you have the similarities. Ex-Marines, the date. Some of them move from one place to another place at the perfect time. Okay, that's what you'll find in this chart. Okay, so they did no case linkage. The Secret Service, when they're asked by the ARB, we'd like to see the files on these prior plots and Kennedy's travel. They shred everything. They shred everything in 1993, and even before that, right? There's an exponential increase in the attempts as Dallas approaches. More and more attempts. He wasn't going to make it out in 1963 alive. There's no way. Okay, because the next year was an election year, and he would have been campaigning. Many subjects are ex-military, FPCC linked, and with timely movements. That's not happenstance. This is what Doug Horn, I think, called the evidentiary mess of the last century. You have the worst security for Kennedy, the worst security for Oswald, and let's make it three, the worst autopsy ever conducted in the US by three buffoons, right? Buffoons. These guys did not have experience or significant experience in conducting autopsies. The best guy was in Washington, a guy called Milton Hepburn, I think, and he was ready.
He was an hour away, wasn't
he? He was an hour away, he was ready. They're going to call him. No, we want people following military orders. That's who we want doing the autopsy. So that occurs. The brain, okay, this is an illustration of what they claim Kennedy's brain looked like after the assassination. It looked nothing like that. It was one-third to half blown up. Okay, but Humes himself said, no, as much as 2/3 of the right cerebellum was missing. Now, what the cerebellum is and what splattered would have suggested a front shock. Okay, Curtis, okay, and a whole bunch of people said that. The brain didn't look like this. This is the other thing.
What?
Is the
No,
photo.
that's intact.
Pardon?
No,
this, by the way, these are not Kennedy's brains. Let me just explain why I put this slide here. This is the color of the brain that was referred to, okay, after the assassination. But for it to have this color, it would have had to have been set for 2 or 3 weeks, according to Doug Horn. This should have been the color. So they said, we're not even talking about Kennedy's brain. Okay, so that's now, optical density readings, okay, I'll try and explain that, but this here is what Aguilar and Mantic did, is they took X-rays, the X-rays of Kennedy's skull, and they said if there was a full brain in there that looked like this, it wouldn't have this lighting, this lighting going through the X-ray. So they use this measurement to say, wait a minute, even the X-rays does not suggest a brain like the one we saw before. So even when you do an X-ray of a skull, depending on how opaque it is, you can have an idea of the damage. So that's what they did. Now, this guy here, he's one of the top criminalists in the US, Henry Lee. And what he says, if you didn't section the brain, therefore you can't elucidate the trajectory. You don't know what it was. So as a criminalist, I can't even go in front of a judge or a jury and say, here's what happened. So, you know, I mean, that's how messy or how bad, you know, the fact that you didn't track the injuries and what it means to a court case. It would go down in flames. Okay. This single bullet. My God, I mean, do I even need to spend much time on that chapter?
I don't think so.
But it is a chokehold, and it's gotten worse. I'll tell you what I enjoyed about this chapter. Jim found an interview between a recent book between Arlen Specter and Epstein, and he explains, look, to the question, you know, why was it important to have a magic bullet? Here's what he says. The committee at the time had no idea that unless one bullet had hit Kennedy and Connolly, there had to be a second assassin. That's his motive for coming up with the magic bullet. So it's more by necessity than by science. Then he says, I showed them the Zapruder film frame by frame and explained that they could either accept the single bullet theory or begin looking for a second assassin. He's quoted saying that. That's Arlen Specter. This is what you know Jeff Meek, right?
Yeah.
Jeff Meek was nice enough to provide us for the first time with this document. And I'll tell you what this document is the FBI lab technician who did spectral analysis on Kennedy's necktie and his neckband, found no metal residue, no metallic residue. He found some on the back, and they found some on Connolly's clothing. Even though they washed Connolly's clothes, they took his, who does this? They fixed the limousine, they washed the limousine, and they did that with Connolly's clothes. But even after the washing, they were able to find some metallic residue, but none on the necktie. So I asked Brian Edwards. I didn't want it to be Paul Bleau that interpreted that information. Brian Edwards says, you know, he says two things. Either the copper jacket was completely destroyed on impact. I don't know how that, you know, could explain Connolly's metallic residue in the back, but nevertheless, or it was an entirely different projectile with a different composition. But either one means it isn't a single bullet that went through the top. And this is what this document does. And the person who gave us that was Jeff Meek, who got it from the daughter of the lab technician. So as far as we know, it's the first time this is going to be exposed. Jeff Meek wrote about it. Okay, so here's Connolly's clothing. You can see how low the shot came in. And right here, if you go close, you can see the bullet hole in the necktie right there. And you can see
You
where
mean Kennedy's country?
Kennedy's necktie, yeah. Yes. And now, of course, Paul Landis. So what we did with Paul Landis is we said, here's what he says, but we haven't read his paper. We have to give it time. So Paul Landis now is really, well, the great thing with Landis is he's being taken seriously by mainstream media. He's being taken seriously. He's not being ridiculed outright. So that's giving us a hint that there's maybe a change of the tune or the landscape in the U.S. on how, because he was on CNN, he was on Fox News, he was on, and they brought in someone to say why his story doesn't make sense, but they brought in Jeff Morley, who supported it, and it was an interesting debate. Proof of a front shot. That's our 9th chokehold. Witness testimony, 52 said the known, 48 said the depository. This website, you can link to every witness. All the witnesses are named, and then you can hyperlink to what they said. This is a must read for anyone. Okay, there's 2 websites that do that. Okay, and then you have known and depository elsewhere.
Not asked is a telling.
Pardon?
Not asked is a telling,
Yes.
telling statistic.
Yes, they didn't want to know.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Josiah Thompson did splatter analysis. He did a wonderful presentation. I borrowed a slide. Okay, so, right. That's his school book depositories over here. These are the officers that get struck by debris, right? Here's Kennedy. He gets debris all over the place, but he only gets a little bit, I think, more on his left side because he's being shielded by this guy. There's some that goes here, and we know that on the trunk, Jackie went picked up some brain parts, right? So if you do a line here, where do you get to? You get to the grassy knoll, right? Now, remember what Curry said. Just by the splatter, you know, and everything going backwards, there had to be a shot from the front. Okay, so that's highly suggestive. Now, you can take each one and say, well, witnesses can be wrong. This, well, you know, it's not the perfect science, and so on and so forth. But it gets better, right? This here is interesting. I had to put it, because even Blakey found Sam Holland to be the ultimate witness. His story never changed. He was on the overpass. He says, we saw smoke in this area. We all ran to the picket fence. And then he looked down, he says, I saw footprints. And we saw, I think, cigarette butts, but anyway, at least footprints. Okay, and this is what I found incredibly interesting, is Josiah Thompson took a photo of Sam Holland standing where he thought the shot came from. Well, this is Mary Mormon's photo. Look at the protrusion right here. It's not perfect proof, but you look at that and you say, there's something interesting there. You don't know for sure, but you had witnesses, but then you had Lee Bowers, you had Powell, you had incredible witnesses. So many said there was smoke or some activity or something near the grassy knoll.
The acoustics that Mike mentioned, is that spot as well, isn't it?
Pardon?
The acoustics that Mike mentioned, is that spot as well?
Yes, yes. I by the way, believe it, but the committee, you know, our group said, well, does it reach the level, you know, because they really, you know, muddied the waters around.
But it's an additional to
Oh
all
yeah,
the other things that
it is
you've-
corroboration.
Yeah,
I go back to what I say, how could a faulty test show both the depository and here?
yeah.
Which corroborates everything the witnesses say, anyway, to me it doesn't make any sense.
People could smell gun smoke when they went behind
Yeah,
them.
Yarborough.
Yeah.
Yarborough, yeah. Now here, the biggest lie by the House Select Committee on Assassination was that the Bethesda doctors saw different skull damage. They didn't see, you know, the exit wound in the back of the head. These people here all work at Parkland. That's Audrey Bell. That's the one who wrote a book.
Crenshaw.
Thank you. Okay. And they're all saying, hey, there was an egg-shaped exit wound in the back of the head. And then declassification comes along and they say, what? Here are the actual drawings made by people. Okay, so Audrey Bell had this drawn for the ARB or the HSCA who declassified it, but this is Audrey Bell. This is cyber. Look at where the exit wound is. But what they found out later is the people at Bethesda were all describing the same thing also. They said, no, it's an exit wound, or there was a huge defect. Now the defect got bigger, but it started here, and because of the way they messed around with the head during the autopsy, I'm not sure. I'm agnostic to what caused extra damage, but there was definitely huge amount of damage to the back of the head. Okay, that would be synonymous with a front shot. Now our last one, and you know, I think I'm going to make time on this, is our last chapter is our longest chapter. It's called 60 Years of Obstruction of Justice. And what we do is we go through the Warren Commission, we go through the Garrison case, we go through the Church Committee, Rockefeller Commission. They're all tampered with. There's intimidation, there's obstruction of justice going on. I'll show you a few. Okay, it starts with Hoover. He starts right from the get-go saying, I'm concerned that people won't believe that there's a lone nut. We have to work it in a way that people will believe that there was a lone assassin. And you know, they haven't had a conclusion by then. But this is what sets up the Warren Commission. Okay? And that's in Book 5, the Church Committee. You can read that. And they're saying, well, you know, they try to lay an agenda and stick to that agenda or that storyline. Is basically what they're saying. Look, Sullivan said Gerald Ford was the FBI spy, and Hoover was really happy that Ford was on the commission because he could protect the FBI. Okay? CIA in Miami, they know about the DRE and all the Cuban exiles. They don't even start an investigation. They don't even want to know and dig into Carlos Bringier and all these people. They do nothing. Dulles? Well, he doesn't talk about, hey, I know Ruth Payne. I know George DeMornshire. I know the people, the CIA Mafia plots to remove it. He doesn't say anything about that. And that would have brought the investigation in a whole other direction. Key witnesses that you were saying not questioned. Seibert wasn't questioned. O'Neill weren't questioned. Leading questions. Stenographer Hanky Panky. They actually had one session with Russell who thought a stenographer was taking notes. And he was saying, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. She didn't do anything of the nature. She was never billed. They couldn't find the bill for the session. Anyway, the list, Hosey's note thing, you know, I mean, it's just crazy, you know, some of the things. That's the Warren Commission. But it happened with everyone. The Church Committee had pressure put on it. The HSCA, well, they got rid of Sprague and Tannenbaum because they were doing so well. Okay? It's incredible the amount of obfuscation and...
Do you include the Joe Hinnad? What's the guy's name?
Bleau?
No, Joe Hinnad is... What's his name?
Oh, Joanides, yes.
Yeah, do you include that?
Oh, yes.
With respect to,
Joanides,
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be in there.
yeah.
Well, hold it. You'll see his picture. Okay. And then the Clark panel comes up and says, oh boy, you know, I am the, you know, they get involved in the Warren Commission. Sorry, not the Warren, the Garrison case. Who the heck does that? It was for the state of Louisiana. What is the federal government doing getting involved in that investigation? Tannenbaum said, hey, you know what, Garrison? He was right. Every time we looked into some of the things he said, we think that he had that Oswald had a relationship with Ferry. Yeah, Dick Clay Shaw, he was a spy. or he did missions for intelligence. So that Tannenbaum, he says, and yeah, Garrison's offices were bugged. They were bugged. And they did set down reporters to contaminate his whole trial. So, you know, this is, again, now, this is the Rockefeller Committee. Look at the pictures here. Dick Cheney actually did some proofreading of the report. He was in charge of quality control on the report. David Bellin, I mean, he's out of the Warren Commission, and they bring him back to handle the Rockefeller Commission, right? Kissinger told Bellin, no, no, don't hold that press conference and don't say that. He was controlling everything that was going to be said. And of course you have Rockefeller and our friend Gerald Ford, the FBI spy, who still probably had the same allegiances. The Church Committee, George Bush Sr. played a role in slowing down all the information that was coming out, because the Church Committee and the beginning of the HSC were extremely successful in getting information. It had to stop. Began with Bush, and Joanides came in, and he became the key blocker for, and that's from Dan Hardaway and Ed Lopez. David Atlee Phillips and Ann Goodpasture, they wanted to bring them in for lies, obvious lies that they made, and they wanted to bring them to justice, but Blakey blocked it. Blakey said, no, we're not going to go that far. But these people lied their heads off to the investigators. The ARB, Intelligence Agency Resistance, they said it. They said the Secret Service shredded files. The Office of Naval Intelligence squashed Terry Pike. Why? Terry Pike was cooperative. Terry Pike was the liaison, and she was providing information to the ARB, and the ONI said that's enough, and she lost her career because of her help to the ARB. We get into media complicity, so we have a chapter or some sections on Mockingbird and how the CIA attacks critics. We have an awful lot of interesting stuff there. And we end with Trump and Biden, how they are breaking law. And our attorneys are very, very eloquent on that. And how, you know, the postponements. So that's what the book is about. We think that in those 10 chokeholds, the audience will, or the readers, will have no choice but say, hey, something's crooked. But we think we'll go farther than that. And again, we don't get into who did it, you know, what did happen exactly. We're just saying, hey, look, if we want to know after 60 years why this case stinks, in a summary, here's how we would, and we do it around 10 chokeholds. And the problem being, you know, don't get me wrong, these are great books, but there's a few, there's some misinformation in some of them, right? Like, you look at them and you almost have to pick them out. You'd have to do a best of to get the material for some of this, you know? So we said, okay, well, I love Jim Marrs, okay? But if I had to explain to someone, why do you think there was a conspiracy, I would settle on those 10 points, or our key one. So, I don't know if you have any questions, or be happy to answer.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Any questions, guys?
A general question.
Mike.
Well, yeah, when you showed the chart of the different attempts or shooters that were found with rifles in different locations, there was also a column there that said the services, the secret services, was there any communication between them? All of them said none.
Yeah.
Do we know if there, after the Kennedy assassination and after the Warren Commission, was there anybody raise any questions about why the FBI and the CIA weren't talking to each other and weren't helping each other with all this information, which I think still went on as far as 9/11. They said that, I know it's a different case completely, but 9/11, that there's been this miscommunication between the two departments that don't like each other. But being that it was an assassination of the president, I wondered if anything was ever raised about why there was no communication with the facts and the evidence and the. Do we know anything about that?
What's interesting is the liaisons with the Warren Commission. In the
Right.
case of the CIA, they started with a guy called Whitten, and he was doing a serious job. They got rid of him and put Angleton.
Okay.
For the FBI, no, that was the FBI, FBI was, I forget who it was, Rolka, I think. And the Secret Service had a guy, and the three people knew one another from their OSS days. So in terms of cooperating, in terms of what they would say to the Warren Commission, they had three like-minded people, the Secret Service, the FBI, and the Warren Commission. Two, the longer term things, I wouldn't be able to answer.
No.
I don't know.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a couple of points. You mentioned Schweiker's claim that the DBT were corrupt and they helped really get into the basement and kill Oswald. For those of you that didn't see this, we had David Josephs, and I know you rate as well. He did a 3 or 4 hour Zoom cast earlier. Did you attend that one, Paul? Yeah, it was very, very good.
Oh.
And it's on our DPUK website and on our YouTube channel. So if you really want to get into the minutiae of how Ruby potentially got into the basement, who were the bad actors, that's a really good Zoom cast. I've forgotten his name. It was up there on one of the earlier slides. The HSCA guy.
Sprague?
No, the guy that mentioned the SS travel documents being destroyed.
Secret Service?
Yeah.
That would be Samalak.
Yes, some of that.
That's ARB.
He's on, ARB, sorry, he's on the Out of the Blank, Robbie Robertson.
Oh, is
He's a
he?
really good podcaster. So I would urge you to go and look that up, because he does a show, certainly it's been within the last 3-4 months, something of that ilk. You mentioned Chief Curry.
Yeah.
This is another Out of the Blank podcast. There's a Californian-based researcher called John D. Mancino, who was interviewed by, I'd never heard of this researcher, he was interviewed by Robbie Robertson, and there's a whole section on his interview with Jesse Curry. It's really quite enlightening. And that was the 10th of August, that was broadcast. So go to the Out of the Blank thing,
That's
and
amazing.
find it. And I was going to ask you something, Stuart. In 2018 we had an FPCC presenter, didn't we? Really good presenter. I think you should get in touch with that guy. What was his name? Do you remember?
No, I can't.
Do you remember? Yeah. Remember Mike?
I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
I remember those.
Oh, I'll look that up.
I'd love to hear.
But I mean, we need to connect you with that guy if you're doing a lot of work on
Yeah.
on Fair Play. Yeah. Okay. Shall we have some coffee or?
Just a question though, was Jesse Curry not in the lead car on the day? And wasn't it Hargis that came up to him and told him what had happened? So how would he have seen the blood splatter?
That's a good point.
You may have seen it
He
in
was
the car.
just
He
ahead.
seen it from the car, but I thought he was looking at the dictaphone and everything. I thought that was more of
Well, who was the officer? I don't know
Was it
if it was the
Hargis?
sheriff or Curry himself who testified about how far the car moved at 12 miles an hour between the shots. And when you work out the timing from that, distance equals velocity multiplied by time, you get exactly the same amount of time as you get on the recordings
Oh,
for the first 3 shots.
yeah.
So he's perfect corroboration
For the,
for the first 3 shots. There are more shots,
yeah,
but those first 3
yeah.
are the ones that he heard and described very, very analytically using the motion of his car against a lamppost on the side of the road. Then we moved 15 feet, then we moved another 10 feet, and there was another shot.
I totally concur. These are the
It's
people,
just one of many corroborations.
because they did the Kent Tower shooting echo analysis, the specialists, they had great reputations.